I never thought my own daughter would be the one to hand me a pen and smile while doing it. I was 69 years old. I had my routines, my neighbors, my Tuesday afternoon quilting circle, and a house that had held 42 years of my life inside its walls. The hydrangeas my husband planted along the front walk came back every June without fail. The kitchen still had the same pale yellow tiles we picked out together the summer before he got sick. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't lost. I was simply a woman living in her own home, on her own terms, the way I had always done. My daughter had other ideas. It started the way it always does, I suppose. Gradually, so gradually that by the time I understood what was happening, the machinery had already been running for months. She began calling more often in the fall. Not the kind of calls we used to have, catching up about her kids, her garden, whatever she was reading. These calls had an agenda. She asked about the furnace. She asked about the roof. She asked whether I'd had my eyes checked lately, whether I was driving at night, whether I'd thought about what would happen if I had a fall. I told her the furnace was fine, the roof was fine. My eyes were the same as they'd been for 10 years, and I drove wherever I pleased. She would go quiet for a moment after each answer. Then she'd say something like, "I just worry, Mom. I just want to make sure you're okay." I was okay, but I was starting to feel like proving it was becoming my second job. Her husband started coming to visit more that winter. He was a man who measured things. He would walk through my house with his eyes doing calculations I couldn't see, glancing at the ceilings, running a thumb along the window frames, standing in the doorway of a room a beat too long. He was friendly enough. He always helped clear the table after dinner, but there was something in the way he moved through my home that made me feel like a guest in it. "You know," he said one evening in February, after the dishes were done and we were sitting in the living room, "a place like this would sell really well in this market." I looked at him. "We're not selling," I said. He laughed. Of course. I just mean the value is there. It's a real asset." My daughter caught my eye from across the room. She gave me a small smile that I didn't know how to read. That was the first moment I felt something cold move through me. Not fear exactly. More like recognition. The way you recognize a smell before you can name it. By March, the conversations had shifted. My daughter began raising the idea of me coming to stay with them, just for a little while, just to see how it felt. Their house was bigger, she said. The kids would love having me there. And their neighborhood was so much more. She paused, looking for the right word, convenient. Convenient for whom? I did not ask. I said I would think about it. I had no intention of thinking about it. My house was not inconvenient. My life was not inconvenient. I had Vera, next door, who brought me soup when I had a cold, and whose cat I watered when she visited her sister. I had my quilting circle. I had the library on Thursday mornings where I helped with the children's reading program. I had my husband's hydrangeas, but the calls kept coming. And then, in April, my daughter arrived on a Thursday with a folder. I remember the folder. It was blue. She set it on my kitchen table like it belonged there, and she sat down across from me and folded her hands, and I knew, in the way that mothers know things, that this visit had been planned for some time. "Mom," she said, "we've been talking to some people." "About your situation?" "What situation?" I asked. She looked down at her hands. "The house is a lot for one person, the taxes, the upkeep, everything. And with your knee, my knee is fine. It bothers you in the winter. Everything bothers everyone in the winter." She opened the folder. Inside there were papers, printed pages with highlighted sections. She slid one across to me. It was information about a senior living community about 40 minutes away. The photos showed smiling people in a sunlit common room. There were activities listed: water aerobics, movie nights, a putting green. I looked at the photos. I looked at my daughter. I said, "No." She said, "Mom, just read it." "I have read it. The answer is no." She leaned forward. "You can't just keep saying no to everything. You're not thinking about what happens when things get harder. You're not thinking about the future." "I'm thinking about it right now," I said, "and in my future, I am in this house." She left that afternoon looking tired in a way that made me feel guilty, which I think was the point. Her husband called that evening. He was gentler than she'd been, which somehow made it worse. He talked about property values again. He talked about equity. He used the word practical 4 times in 10 minutes. I thanked him and said goodnight. I did not sleep well. Over the next few weeks, my daughter began doing something that I can only describe as a slow erosion. She would stop by unannounced and find things to worry about: a loose step on the back porch, a burned-out bulb in the laundry room. She'd fix them herself, quickly, efficiently, and then mention them again later as evidence. She sent articles to my email about elderly women living alone. She asked my doctor at my annual physical, I found out later, whether I was managing independently. I was managing independently. I had been managing independently for 6 years since my husband passed. But suddenly, that independence was being framed as something fragile, something that needed monitoring. What I didn't understand then was how much had already been decided. In May, my daughter called and asked if I would come stay with them for a few weeks. Her youngest had a recital coming up. Her oldest needed help with a school project. She wanted my company, she said. She missed me. I said yes. I packed 2 weeks' worth of clothes and drove myself to her house and hugged my grandchildren and felt, for a few days, like everything was fine. It was not fine. On the 3rd day, while I was reading in the guest room, I heard her husband on the phone in the hallway. His voice was low, but the house was quiet, and I have always had good ears. He said, "The agent is coming Tuesday. I think we can list by the end of the month." I put my book down. I sat very still. He said, "She doesn't need to know the details yet. Let's get the numbers first." I did not go into the hallway. I did not confront him. Something in me went very quiet. The same quiet I had felt as a young mother when one of my children was sick and I had to hold myself steady to be useful. I let that quiet settle over me like a coat. I picked up my book and kept reading, and I did not let my hands shake. That night at dinner, I watched my daughter more carefully than I had in years. The way she passed the bread without looking at me. The way her husband refilled my water glass with a cheerfulness that had edges. My grandchildren ate their pasta and argued about a video game and knew nothing, bless them. They knew nothing at all. I excused myself early, saying I was tired. In the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought about my husband. I thought about the day we bought that house. I thought about his hydrangeas. I thought about all the things I had not lost yet, and all the things that were apparently being arranged for me to lose while I sat here eating dinner and being managed. I was not going to be managed. The next morning I woke early and drove to see my attorney. I had not visited him in 2 years. He was a quiet, careful man who had handled my husband's estate and who I trusted the way you trust the structure of a well-built house. You don't think about it until you need it. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked me some questions. Careful questions about what had been said, when, by whom. He asked about the folder. He asked about the phone call I'd overheard. Nothing has been signed, I told him. Nothing has happened yet. He nodded. Good. We talked for almost 2 hours. When I left, I had a plan. It was not a dramatic plan. It did not involve confrontations or ultimatums. It was quiet and methodical, and I thought my husband would have approved of it. I drove back to my daughter's house, and I was kind to everyone at lunch. In June, the folder returned. This time, it was thicker. My daughter sat me down in the living room, her living room, and explained that they had been talking to a real estate agent about my house. Just exploratory, she said, just to understand the options. The agent had done a preliminary assessment. The numbers were good, really good, and there was a community she wanted me to look at, not the one from before, a different one, nicer, closer to them. She had taken a tour herself. I asked if I could see the paperwork. She said of course, and handed me a set of documents, an assessment form, a preliminary listing agreement, some brochures for the community with a sticky note on one that said, "Mom would love the garden program." I read everything carefully. My daughter watched me read with an expression that was trying to be patient. "What do you think?" she said when I looked up. "I think I need a few days," I said. She looked relieved. That told me everything. I called my attorney that evening. He walked me through each document. The listing agreement had some unusual language in it, language that would have authorized my daughter and her husband to act as my representatives in the sale. Not unusual for an elderly parent who couldn't manage the process herself, he said. Except I had told no one I couldn't manage the process myself. We talked about what to do. I went back to my daughter 3 days later. I said I had thought about it. I said the house felt like a lot. I said I was tired. I said maybe they were right. I watched something lift in her face. A relief so real it hurt me to see it, because it meant this had been weighing on her, and I had to hold two true things at once, that she believed she was helping me and that what she was doing was wrong. I signed the listing agreement. I signed the community application. I signed 3 other documents she put in front of me. She hugged me after. She said this was the right decision. Her husband shook my hand. They opened a bottle of wine, and I sat with them in their kitchen, and I let them be happy. And I said very little, and I drove home that night feeling like the loneliest person on earth. What none of them knew was that my attorney had reviewed every page before I signed. What none of them knew was that 3 weeks earlier I had filed a transfer of my property into a revocable living trust, a trust in which I was the sole trustee. The house was no longer titled in my name alone in the way the listing agreement assumed. The representative authority my daughter's documents had tried to establish was built on a foundation that no longer existed. The listing agreement was valid. The community application was valid. But the house? The house was mine, in a way that paperwork alone could not unravel. My attorney had advised me not to explain this yet, to let things proceed quietly until the right moment. I am not naturally a quiet person, but I had been watching my daughter and her husband long enough to understand that they responded to what they thought they saw. So I showed them what they wanted to see. The real estate agent came to my house in late June. She was perfectly pleasant. She walked through the rooms with a clipboard, and I offered her coffee and answered her questions, and felt surreal standing in my own kitchen explaining its features as if I had already left it. She listed the house the following week. There was a sign in my yard. My daughter texted a photo of it with a heart emoji. I went to my quilting circle that Tuesday and sat with my friends and sewed and said nothing about any of it. Vera brought lemon cookies. Outside the window, the hydrangeas were just beginning to open. 2 weeks later, there was an offer. A good one, my daughter called to tell me. She was excited. She said this was all working out so well. I said I was glad. We scheduled a closing. The closing was at a title company downtown. My daughter and her husband were both there. The buyer's agent was there. My attorney was there. I sat across the table from all of them in a blue dress I'd had for years, and I kept my hands folded in my lap. The title officer began reviewing the chain of ownership. She went through the documents. She got to the trust filing, and she stopped. She looked at the documents again. She asked my attorney a question in a low voice. He answered it. She asked another question. My daughter said, "What's happening?" My attorney set a folder on the table. He explained in clear and simple language what a revocable living trust was. He explained when it had been filed. He explained that the representative authority granted in the listing documents my daughter had prepared was not applicable to property held in trust for which the trustee, me, and only me, held decision-making power. He explained that I had engaged him 6 weeks ago, when I first became aware that plans were being made about my property without my knowledge or informed consent. My daughter said, "Mom." Just that one word. I looked at her. I kept my hands still. Her husband said something about a misunderstanding. He said they were only trying to help. He said no one had intended any harm. He said the word practical twice. My attorney said that we were not there to litigate intentions. He said that the sale as structured could not proceed. He said there were additional matters he would be raising separately, including the documents I had been asked to sign, granting representative authority, documents whose implications had not been clearly explained to me. The buyer's agent gathered her things and left. The closing did not happen. My daughter cried in the parking lot. I stood beside her, and I did not feel the satisfaction I had expected to feel. I felt tired. I felt grief for something I couldn't entirely name. Maybe for the version of my daughter I had wanted her to be, or the version of our relationship I thought we had. I had known she could be impatient. I had not known she could do this. I drove home alone. The hydrangeas were still blooming. I stood at the front walk for a while before going inside. There were legal proceedings. I won't explain all of them here. That is not really the point of this story. My attorney handled most of it. The unauthorized representative authority documentation was reviewed. There were consequences that I did not create and did not prevent. My daughter and her husband were required to pay some of my legal fees. There were other terms I agreed to keep private. My daughter did not speak to me for 4 months. When she finally called, she said she didn't know what had happened to her, that she had convinced herself it was all for my benefit, that she had stopped hearing me because she had decided she knew better. She said she was sorry. She said it more than once. I listened. I did not immediately say everything was fine because it wasn't, but I told her I loved her because that was true. We are still rebuilding. It is slow. Some things you cannot hurry. I still live in my house. I had the back porch step fixed by a contractor I found myself. I replaced the laundry room bulb. Last spring, I divided the hydrangeas along the front walk because they'd grown large enough to share. I gave a clump to Vera and she planted them along her fence where they came in beautifully this June. My Tuesday quilting circle still meets. The library still has me on Thursday mornings. I still drive wherever I please. I am 69 years old. I know the value of my property and I know the value of my life, and I know the difference between someone helping you and someone helping themselves to you. I signed those papers in my daughter's living room with full knowledge of what I was doing. She thought she had won. She found out what winning actually looked like when my attorney laid it on the table at that title company. Not loudly, not with drama, just quietly and precisely, the way real things are usually done. I drove home that evening with the windows down. The air smelled like cut grass and something flowering. I turned into my driveway and sat there for a moment with the engine off. I was free. I had always been free. I had just had to prove it.